15 years ago in the sleepy town of Millbrook, West Virginia, a local fisherman made a grisly discovery that would haunt the community for years to come. The body of a missing high school teacher was found in an abandoned hunting cabin, with evidence suggesting she knew her killer. Despite an intensive investigation, the case quickly went cold until one detective refused to let it die. When advanced DNA technology was finally applied to evidence that had been overlooked for over a decade, it revealed a shocking truth that left the entire Millbrook community stunned. The killer had been hiding in plain sight all along, someone the victim had trusted completely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. On a crisp November morning in 2010, the town of Millbrook, West Virginia was shrouded in a thin mist that clung to the hillsides surrounding Blackwater River. The water moved lazily that day, swirling around fallen branches and exposed rocks as local fisherman Roy Garrison made his way along the muddy bank. He'd been fishing these waters for over 40 years and knew every bend and pool. That morning, Roy had ventured farther upstream than usual, drawn by reports of good catches in the deeper waters near the old Kessler property. As he rounded a bend, he spotted a dilapidated hunting cabin nestled among tall pines. The structure was barely visible from the main road, its weathered boards and sagging roof suggesting years of abandonment. Curiosity drew Roy closer. Perhaps the cabin would offer shelter if the forecast rain arrived early. The door hung askew on rusted hinges, creaking as Roy pushed it open. The musty smell of decay immediately hit his nostrils, but something else lingered beneath it, something sickly sweet that made him recoil instinctively. As Roy's eyes adjusted to the dim interior, he noticed unusual markings on the dirt floor, drag marks leading to a corner where a faded tarp was bunched unnaturally. Something in Roy's gut told him not to proceed, but decades of hunting had steeled his nerves. He approached slowly, using the tip of his fishing rod to lift the edge of the tarp. The instant Roy saw what lay beneath, his body went rigid with shock. The pale, bloated face of a woman stared back at him, her once vibrant eyes now clouded and lifeless. Despite the decomposition, Roy recognized her immediately, Sarah Mitchell, a beloved high school English teacher who had gone missing 3 weeks earlier. His hands trembling violently, Roy dropped his fishing gear and stumbled backward, almost falling as he frantically pulled his phone from his pocket. The call to emergency services was brief, his voice breaking as he struggled to explain what he'd found. Within 20 minutes, the quiet riverside was transformed by the wail of sirens as vehicles from the Millbrook Sheriff's Department bumped along the narrow dirt road. Deputies secured the area with yellow tape, their faces grim as they established a perimeter around the cabin. State forensic investigators arrived shortly after, carrying equipment cases and donning white protective suits. The investigation team moved with practiced precision. Photographers documented the scene from multiple angles before the body was examined. Detective Marcus Reeves, a veteran homicide investigator with salt and pepper hair and weathered features, knelt beside the tarp-covered remains, his expression unreadable as he studied the victim's position. "She wasn't killed here," he said quietly to the county coroner. "The blood patterns don't match. Someone transported her after death." The coroner nodded in agreement, pointing to distinctive markings on the victim's wrists. "Ligature marks. She was restrained before death. And look at this," he added, gesturing to a small puncture wound at the base of her neck. "Possible injection site." As investigators combed the cabin, a young deputy called out from near a rotting windowsill. "Detective, I've got something here." He held up a silver necklace with a distinctive pendant, a small book, its pages etched with minute detail. "It's clean. Doesn't match the condition of anything else here." Reeves took the necklace, recognition dawning in his eyes. "This is Mitchell's. Her students mentioned she wore it every day, a gift from her senior class last year." He sealed it carefully in an evidence bag. The killer might have placed it here deliberately. Outside, Roy Garrison sat on a fallen log, a blanket draped over his shoulders despite the mild temperature. His face had lost all color, and his hands still trembled as he recounted his discovery to a deputy. Beyond the police perimeter, a small crowd had gathered, hikers, fishermen, and locals drawn by the commotion. Word spread quickly in a town as small as Millbrook. By late afternoon, the forensics team had processed the scene, gathering fibers, footprint casts, and trace evidence. Sarah Mitchell's body was carefully placed in a body bag and loaded into the county coroner's van. As the vehicle pulled away, Reeves stood watching, his jaw set in determination. Whoever did this, he said to his partner, knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't random. She was targeted, subdued, and hidden somewhere this remote for a reason. Back at the Millbrook Sheriff's Department, the investigation headquarters transformed into a hive of activity. A conference room was cleared out, its walls soon covered with crime scene photos, maps, and a timeline of Sarah Mitchell's last known movements. At the center was a photograph of Sarah, not the grim image from the cabin, but one showing her smiling in front of her classroom, her brown hair framing a face that radiated warmth and intelligence. Sarah Mitchell had been 34 years old, unmarried but engaged to local pharmacist David Connor. She taught English at Millbrook High School for 8 years and was universally described as passionate, dedicated, and beloved by students and colleagues alike. Her disappearance 3 weeks earlier had shocked the community, sparking volunteer search parties that combed the forests and riverbanks of Garrett County. The autopsy report arrived the following morning, confirming what Reeves had suspected. Sarah had been killed elsewhere and moved to the cabin post-mortem. Cause of death: a lethal injection of potassium chloride, causing cardiac arrest. The toxicology report showed traces of sedatives in her system. Whoever killed her had medical knowledge, knew how to subdue her efficiently and administer a drug that would leave minimal evidence. Reeves and his team began methodically working through Sarah's life. They interviewed her fiancé, David Connor, who provided a solid alibi. He'd been at a pharmaceutical conference in Charleston the weekend she disappeared, with dozens of witnesses and hotel security footage confirming his presence. They spoke with Sarah's colleagues at Millbrook High School, learning she had been working late the Friday evening she vanished, grading midterm papers. The school's elderly janitor confirmed seeing her car in the parking lot around 9 p.m., but it was gone when he finished his shift at 10:30. Her vehicle was later found in her apartment complex parking lot, keys still in the ignition, suggesting she'd. For states, eventually attributed to Gerald Marsh through DNA matching or circumstantial evidence. Families who had waited decades for answers finally received them, creating a constellation of closure that spanned the region. Following this success, the unit received increased attention from law enforcement agencies nationwide, seeking to implement similar methodologies for their own backlog of unresolved cases. Reeves found himself speaking at conferences, consulting with departments, and advocating for the preservation of evidence that might one day yield answers through technologies not yet developed. The most important thing is maintaining the possibility of future resolution, he emphasized during a presentation to the National Association of Cold Case Investigators. Proper evidence preservation, detailed documentation, and digital archiving create a bridge between investigators separated by decades. This philosophy extended beyond professional presentations into practical assistance. The unit developed protocols for smaller departments with limited resources, helping them prioritize which cases had the highest potential for resolution and how to preserve crucial evidence that might eventually speak. Throughout this period of external focus, Reeves maintained his connection to individual cases, understanding that the human element distinguished their work from mere technical exercises. He particularly valued the relationships formed with families of victims, whose patience and persistence often matched his own. One such relationship developed with the Ramirez family, whose daughter Elena had disappeared from a Charleston shopping mall in 2001. Though her body was never found, bloodstains in an abandoned vehicle matched her DNA, leading investigators to presume homicide. The case had remained unsolved for 22 years despite strong suspicion focusing on her ex-boyfriend, who had moved to California shortly after her disappearance. Using advanced DNA extraction techniques, the cold case unit re-examined trace evidence from the vehicle's upholstery, identifying genetic material too degraded for analysis when originally collected. The profile matched neither Elena nor her ex-boyfriend, but pointed to another individual entirely, her married professor, with whom she'd been having a secret relationship. When confronted with the evidence, the professor confessed to an argument that had turned violent, followed by panic and disposal of Elena's body in a remote area he claimed he could no longer precisely identify. The revelation stunned the community, as the man had remained a respected academic for decades while carrying this dark secret. For Elena's parents, who had spent years focusing their anger on the ex-boyfriend, the truth brought complicated emotions. "We spent 20 years hating the wrong person," her father told Reeves after the professor's sentencing. "That's a hard thing to reconcile. The mind searches for answers when none are provided," Reeves replied. "Without evidence, suspicion fills the void. At least now we know," Elena's mother added quietly. "Even if we never find her remains, we know what happened and who's responsible. We can finally redirect our energy toward remembering who she was, not just how she died." This sentiment, the shift from dwelling on death to honoring life, increasingly characterized the aftermath of the unit's solved cases. Families often channeled their resolution into meaningful actions, scholarships established in victims' names, advocacy for improved safety measures, support networks for others enduring similar waits for answers. By early 2024, the Cold Case Unit had resolved over 40 long-dormant investigations across West Virginia, ranging from 5 to 52 years old. Each represented not just a statistical success but a universe of connected lives finally granted the clarity needed to move forward. The unit's work also generated unexpected cultural impacts. A documentary filmmaker followed their investigation of a 1984 double homicide, creating a feature that illuminated the patient, methodical nature of cold case resolution, a stark contrast to the dramatic, instantaneous solutions depicted in crime entertainment. The resulting film, The Evidence Waits, received critical acclaim for its honest portrayal of the emotional and scientific dimensions of revisiting dormant cases. It showed investigators painstakingly reconstructing victims' lives, the technological bridges spanning decades, and the profound moments when families finally received answers, whether illuminating or devastating. For Reeves, the documentary offered an opportunity to address misconceptions about their work. During a panel discussion following a screening, an audience member asked why resources should be directed toward decades-old crimes when current cases demanded attention. "It's not an either-or proposition," he replied thoughtfully. "Current investigations absolutely deserve priority for immediate public safety. But cold cases represent promises our justice system made and hasn't yet fulfilled. Each unresolved case erodes public trust a little further and leaves families in perpetual limbo." He paused, considering how to convey the deeper significance of their mission. "Beyond that, there's a fundamental principle at stake, that the passage of time doesn't erase our societal obligation to seek truth. When we demonstrate that justice can arrive even after decades, it changes how potential offenders calculate their chances of evading consequences." The documentary brought another unexpected development: communications from family members of missing or murdered persons whose cases hadn't been officially classified as homicides or had fallen between jurisdictional cracks. These cases existed in an investigative limbo, neither actively pursued nor formally cold. Recognizing this gap, Reeves proposed an expansion of the unit's mission to include case review services for families who had never received satisfactory investigations. The initiative, dubbed the Oversight Project, would evaluate evidence, suggest investigative approaches, and help families navigate the complex landscape of multi-agency involvement. "These families often don't know where to turn," he explained to state officials while seeking approval for the expansion. "They bounce between local departments, state police, and federal agencies, with each assuming another is taking responsibility. Some have been seeking answers for decades with no central point of contact or clear path forward." The proposal received approval in spring 2024, adding 3 positions to the unit specifically for case assessment and family support. The expanded mission affirmed what had become the unit's underlying philosophy, that every person deserved a complete story, and every family had the right to know what had happened to their loved one. As the Oversight Project took shape, Reeves reflected on the journey that had led him from the discovery of Sarah Mitchell's body to creating systems that might prevent other families from experiencing the same prolonged uncertainty. The path hadn't been linear or predictable, but had unfolded through persistence and an evolving understanding of what justice could mean beyond traditional definitions. In June 2024, he received an invitation that brought this evolution full circle. The Millbrook High School library dedicated to Sarah. Made it home but never entered her apartment. Something doesn't add up, Reeves told Sheriff Daniels during their daily briefing. No signs of struggle at her apartment. Car parked normally. It's as if she voluntarily left with someone she knew and trusted. They dug deeper into Sarah's personal life. Friends described her as cautious but warm, with a close circle she'd maintained since college. No known enemies, no recent conflicts. Her relationship with Connor was stable, with plans for a summer wedding already underway. One detail stood out. In the weeks before her disappearance, Sarah had mentioned receiving strange emails to her personal account, messages referring to a past relationship she rarely discussed. She dismissed them as pranks from a former student, but the investigation team now focused on recovering these communications. Meanwhile, forensic analysts processed evidence from the cabin. Fibers, partial fingerprints, and soil samples were cataloged and tested. The silver book necklace yielded nothing useful. It had been wiped clean before being placed at the scene, suggesting the killer wanted it found. As days stretched into weeks, the investigation hit one dead end after another. The emails Sarah had mentioned couldn't be recovered. Her laptop showed signs of remote access and selective deletion of data. Interviews with former students and colleagues revealed no obvious suspects. The cabin itself belonged to a family that had moved to Ohio years earlier, leaving it abandoned and forgotten. 2 months into the investigation, public interest began to wane. Other cases demanded attention, and resources were gradually reassigned. Reeves fought to keep the investigation active, convinced they were missing something crucial. But by early 2011, the Sarah Mitchell murder case was officially designated cold, the files boxed and stored in the department's evidence room. For the residents of Millbrook, life slowly returned to normal. The high school held a memorial service, dedicating the library in Sarah's name. Her fiancé eventually moved away, unable to bear the constant reminders of his loss. The hunting cabin was demolished by county workers, erasing the physical reminder of the tragedy. But in the mind of Detective Marcus Reeves, the case never truly closed. On quiet evenings, he would pull out his personal notes, reviewing details, searching for patterns he might have missed. Sarah's face, both the vibrant teacher in the photograph and the lifeless victim under the tarp, haunted his dreams. He had made a silent promise standing by that cabin: justice would come, no matter how long it took. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In late 2011, a similar case emerged in neighboring Preston County, a nurse found dead with the same distinctive injection method. Reeves immediately contacted the investigating department, sharing his findings from the Mitchell case. The Preston County victim had no obvious connection to Sarah, but the methodology was too similar to ignore. Both women were professionals in their 30s, both had been restrained, injected, and carefully hidden in remote locations. We could be looking at a serial killer with medical training, Reeves suggested to Sheriff Daniels. Someone who knows how to move undetected in professional settings, gain trust, and leave minimal evidence. The theory gained traction when a third victim was discovered in early 2012 across the state line in Maryland, another female professional, another lethal injection. The FBI became involved, creating a task force to investigate what the media now called the professional killer, a moniker that made Reeves grimace at its unintended double meaning. For months, the task force compiled data, cross-referenced victims' histories, and developed profiles of potential suspects. They identified 17 people with medical training who had connections to all 3 regions, interviewing each extensively. Background checks, alibis, and lack of physical evidence gradually eliminated all candidates, leaving the investigation stalled once more. By mid-2013, even the FBI's involvement had diminished, with agents reassigned to more active cases. The task force dissolved, leaving behind thousands of pages of reports but no viable suspects. Reeves found himself once again alone in his determination, keeping a separate file on his desk that the department unofficially tolerated. Sheriff Daniels, approaching retirement, called Reeves into his office one spring afternoon. "Marcus," he said, his voice heavy with resignation, "I know what this case means to you. But you've got active investigations that need your full attention." Reeves nodded stiffly. "I know my responsibilities, Sheriff. But Mitchell deserves justice." "They all do." "I'm not telling you to forget," Daniels clarified. "Just balance it. This obsession isn't healthy." He slid a department pamphlet across the desk, information about the counseling services available to officers. Reeves left it untouched, thanking the sheriff for his concern before returning to his desk. That night, he took his personal case files home, converting his spare bedroom into an unofficial investigation room. If official channels were closing, he would pursue the truth on his own time. For the next 3 years, Reeves maintained this delicate balance, fulfilling his duties as a detective while privately pursuing the Mitchell case. He subscribed to forensic journals, attended criminology conferences at his own expense, and built a network of contacts in labs across the country. He was waiting for something, a breakthrough in technology, a new witness, any development that might shed light on the darkness surrounding Sarah's death. That breakthrough came in an unexpected form in early 2017, when Reeves attended a forensic science symposium in Pittsburgh. A presentation on advances in DNA analysis caught his attention, specifically, a new technique for extracting viable DNA from samples previously considered too degraded for testing. After the presentation, Reeves approached the speaker, Dr. Allison Chen, a forensic geneticist from a private laboratory in Virginia. He explained the Mitchell case, emphasizing the limited DNA evidence they'd recovered from the scene. "The initial testing was inconclusive," Reeves explained. "We had partial profiles from hair samples and touch DNA, but nothing complete enough to run through CODIs or identify a suspect." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Our new extraction protocols might help, especially if you have the original samples preserved correctly. And there's something else you should know about genetic genealogy." She explained how this emerging field combined DNA analysis with genealogical research, using public databases where people voluntarily submitted DNA for ancestry testing. Even without a direct match in criminal databases, investigators could potentially identify suspects through familial connections. "It's been successful in cases decades old," Dr. Chen added. "If you can get approval to reopen the investigation and secure funding for the testing, I believe we could help." Reeves returned to Millbrook energized for the first time in years. He prepared a comprehensive proposal for Sheriff Daniels' successor, Sheriff Tate, outlining the potential of these new technologies and requesting permission to resubmit evidence for advanced testing. Tate, younger and more technology-oriented than his predecessor, reviewed the proposal with interest. "The department budget can't cover the full cost," he warned. "These private labs charge a premium." "I've thought of that," Reeves responded, sliding another document across the desk, a letter from Sarah Mitchell's parents, offering to fund the testing through a foundation they'd established in their daughter's memory. Sheriff Tate signed the approval forms the same day. "Don't get your hopes too high, Marcus. 7 years is a long time." But hope was exactly what Reeves had been missing, and now it flowed through him like electricity. He personally packaged the preserved evidence samples, the hair strands found on Sarah's clothing, skin cells recovered from the ligature marks on her wrists, trace biological material found under her fingernails, and delivered them to Dr. Chen's laboratory in Virginia. "The extraction process takes time," Dr. Chen cautioned. "Then we'll need to amplify the DNA, sequence it, and build a profile. If successful, we can search for matches or familial connections. I'll call you when we have results." The waiting was excruciating. Reeves threw himself into his other cases, solving a series of burglaries and closing 2 drug trafficking investigations in record time. His colleagues noticed a change, a renewed focus, a spark that had been missing for years. 3 months later, Dr. Chen called. "We have something, detective. Not a complete profile, but enough markers for a familial search." We've identified potential relatives of your suspect in the ancestry databases. Reeves drove to Virginia that same day. In the sterile conference room of the laboratory, Dr. Chen displayed a complex family tree on her computer screen, with highlighted branches indicating DNA connections. Based on the genetic markers, we're looking for someone related to these individuals, she explained, pointing to several names. The DNA we recovered is male, and the age of the sample suggests someone who would have been an adult in 2010. The research team had already begun the painstaking process of building backwards and forwards through public records, birth certificates, marriage licenses, obituaries, census data, constructing a comprehensive family history. They narrowed the search to male relatives within the right age range who had connections to Millbrook or surrounding areas. We've identified 17 potential candidates, Dr. Chen concluded. But this one, she highlighted a name, shows the strongest genetic similarity and has verified ties to Garrett County during the relevant time frame. Reeves stared at the name on the screen, a cold realization washing over him. I know him, he said quietly. He was interviewed during the original investigation. The name was Robert Kessler, a nurse anesthetist at Garrett County Memorial Hospital. The hunting cabin where Sarah's body was found had once belonged to his family before they moved to Ohio. During the initial investigation, this connection had been dismissed as coincidental. Records showed the Kesslers had sold the property years before the murder, and Robert had a documented alibi for the weekend of Sarah's disappearance. We need to look deeper, Reeves muttered, more to himself than to Dr. Chen. We missed something. Back in Millbrook, Reeves and Sheriff Tate assembled a small, trusted team to quietly reinvestigate Robert Kessler. They discovered he had attended the same undergraduate college as Sarah Mitchell, graduating 2 years before her. Social media archives showed them in group photos from campus events, not close friends, but certainly acquaintances. More disturbing was the revelation that Kessler had been briefly interviewed during investigations of the other victims attributed to the professional killer. In each case, he had peripheral connections, working at hospitals near the victims' workplaces, attending professional conferences they had also attended, but never enough to make him a serious suspect. He's been hiding in plain sight, Reeves realized. Using his medical knowledge to commit perfect murders, then positioning himself just far enough from each victim to avoid serious scrutiny. But suspicion wasn't proof. They needed solid evidence connecting Kessler directly to Sarah Mitchell's murder. The team obtained a warrant to secretly collect Kessler's DNA from discarded items, a coffee cup, a used tissue, for comparison against the crime scene samples. The match came back positive, confirming what the genetic genealogy had suggested. Robert Kessler's DNA was present on the ligatures that had bound Sarah's wrists. With this evidence, they secured warrants for his home, vehicles, and electronic devices. The search revealed a hidden compartment in Kessler's basement containing souvenirs from each victim, Sarah's missing earrings, personal items from the other victims, all meticulously labeled and preserved. His computer contained encrypted files with detailed records of each murder, including photographs taken before and after death. Most chilling was a journal describing his relationship with Sarah Mitchell in college, a brief romance she had ended, which he had nursed into an obsession over the years. The other victims shared physical characteristics with Sarah, suggesting they were surrogates for his primary fixation. The arrest of Robert Kessler sent shockwaves through Millbrook. This wasn't some drifter or obvious criminal, but a respected medical professional who had worked in the community for years. In the days following his arrest in late 2017, Detective Marcus Reeves found himself at the center of a media storm. Local news vans parked outside the sheriff's department, reporters clamoring for details about the man now called the professional killer. Sheriff Tate handled press conferences with careful precision, revealing only what wouldn't compromise the case. Thanks to advancements in DNA technology and Detective Reeves' unwavering commitment, we've made an arrest in the 2010 murder of Sarah Mitchell. The suspect is also being investigated in connection with similar cases across the tri-state area. For Reeves, the spotlight was uncomfortable but necessary. Every interview raised awareness about the case and the breakthrough technology that made it possible. This arrest should send a message to anyone who thinks time erases their crimes. he told one reporter. Science evolves. Evidence persists. Justice is patient. Behind the scenes, the investigation intensified. With search warrants in hand, Reeves led a team through Kessler's immaculate colonial home in an upscale Millbrook neighborhood. The contrast between the suspect's polished public image and the darkness they uncovered was jarring. Check everything, Reeves instructed his team. Every floorboard, every wall cavity. He's methodical, anything hidden will be well concealed. In the basement, behind a false panel on a bookshelf that required a specific sequence of books to be removed, they discovered a small, climate-controlled room. Inside, forensic technicians photographed shelves of meticulously labeled items, jewelry, ID cards, strands. Moved toward trial, Reeves immersed himself in ensuring every detail was properly documented. The district attorney decided to try the Sarah Mitchell murder first, using the strongest evidence, with the other cases to follow. The strategy aimed to secure at least one life sentence before pursuing the more complex multi-jurisdiction cases. Preparation for trial consumed months. Forensic experts were briefed, evidence chains verified, witnesses prepared. Reeves worked alongside prosecutors, reviewing his notes until he could recite details from memory. The case had defined nearly a decade of his life. He was determined to see it through to justice. In June 2018, the trial of Robert Kessler began in the Garrett County Courthouse. Extra security was in place, with metal detectors at entrances and deputies positioned throughout the building. Media outlets from across the country descended on Millbrook, turning the small town into an impromptu news hub. The courtroom was packed as District Attorney Eleanor Walsh delivered her opening statement, her voice steady but charged with controlled emotion. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about trust betrayed and justice delayed. Sarah Mitchell trusted Robert Kessler when he reached out to her, reconnecting as a former college acquaintance. She had no way of knowing his friendly overtures masked a 7-year obsession, a calculated plan to punish her for a perceived rejection years earlier. Walsh methodically outlined the evidence, the DNA match, the detailed journals documenting Kessler's stalking and murder of Sarah, the trophies found in his home, his recorded confession. She projected crime scene photos on a large screen, clinical but devastating in their impact. The evidence will show that Robert Kessler, using his medical training, sedated Sarah Mitchell in her apartment after gaining entry as a trusted acquaintance. He transported her to a secondary location where he administered a fatal injection of potassium chloride, untraceable in many circumstances, but detected through the exceptional work of our medical examiner. He then transported her body to an abandoned hunting cabin once owned by his family, where he expected it to remain undiscovered indefinitely. Kessler sat impassively during the prosecution's opening, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. His defense attorney, Martin Vaughn, a high-priced criminal defender from Charleston, appeared confident despite the overwhelming evidence. When his turn came, Vaughn approached the jury with measured steps. The prosecution has presented a narrative of calculating evil, but what they haven't acknowledged is the reality of mental illness. Robert Kessler suffers from severe psychological disorders that distorted his perception and impaired his ability to distinguish right from wrong. The evidence will show a man in the grip of delusions, not a cold-blooded killer. The defense strategy became clear: they would pursue an insanity defense, arguing that Kessler's actions stemmed from untreated psychiatric conditions rather than deliberate malice. It was a difficult argument given the evidence of extensive planning and concealment, but Vaughn was skilled at creating reasonable doubt. Over the next 3 weeks, the prosecution built its case methodically. Forensic experts explained the DNA evidence, showing how Kessler's genetic material was found on the ligatures used to restrain Sarah. Computer specialists demonstrated how he had stalked her online, creating false profiles to monitor her social media activities. The most compelling testimony came from Reeves himself, who spent 2 days on the stand detailing the investigation from the discovery of Sarah's body through the breakthrough genetic genealogy that identified Kessler. His testimony was professional but human, occasionally revealing the emotional toll the case had taken on him. For 7 years, Reeves testified, I kept Sarah Mitchell's photo on my desk. Not just as a reminder of an unsolved case, but as a promise that someday, somehow, we would find the truth. When the genetic genealogy results came back pointing to Robert Kessler, I finally believed that promise could be kept. The defense cross-examined Reeves aggressively, questioning the reliability of the new DNA techniques and suggesting confirmation bias had led investigators to focus on Kessler while ignoring other suspects. Reeves remained composed, his answers clear and concise, refusing to be drawn into argumentative exchanges. "The evidence led us to Mr. Kessler," he stated firmly. "Not the other way around." The DNA profile from the crime scene was developed independently, before we had any suspect in mind. The match to Mr. Kessler's family tree was scientific, not subjective. As the trial progressed, the defense called psychiatric experts who testified that Kessler suffered from a combination of narcissistic personality disorder and delusional disorder. They claimed his journal entries showed a disconnection from reality, interpreting normal social interactions as personal slights that required retribution. The prosecution's rebuttal experts countered that Kessler's meticulous planning, evidence concealment, and normal functioning in his professional life demonstrated an awareness of right and wrong. His ability to compartmentalize his criminal behavior from his public persona showed calculation, not delusion. The most dramatic moment came when the prosecution played the video of Kessler's confession. The courtroom fell silent as they watched the defendant calmly describe Sarah's murder, how he had contacted her through email, gradually rebuilding trust, until she agreed to meet him at her apartment. How he had offered her tea laced with sedatives, then injected her with paralyzing agents once she was unconscious. The clinical precision of his description chilled everyone present. When asked why he had targeted Sarah specifically, Kessler's recorded voice replied matter-of-factly, "She made me realize what I was truly capable of. When she ended our relationship in college, I experienced a clarity I'd never known before. I understood that some people deserve to be removed from the equation. Sarah was the first to show me that truth." The defense argued this statement demonstrated Kessler's delusional thinking, but jurors' expressions suggested they saw only calculated malice. After 4 weeks of testimony, closing arguments began. District Attorney Walsh stood before the jury, her voice resonating through the hushed courtroom. The evidence presented leaves no reasonable doubt that Robert Kessler murdered Sarah Mitchell with premeditation and malice. His own words, his own journals, his own trophies tell the story. This was not the act of a man unable to distinguish right from wrong, but of someone who deliberately chose to do wrong and took extensive measures to avoid consequences. Defense attorney Vaughn countered with an impassioned plea to consider Kessler's mental state. A truly rational criminal doesn't keep journals documenting his crimes. He doesn't collect trophies that could incriminate him. These behaviors point not to calculated evil but to a mind untethered from reality. After brief jury instructions from the judge, the 12 of hair trophies from victims spanning 7 years. He documented everything, a tech said, carefully bagging a leather-bound journal. Dates, times, methods. It's all here, like case files, but from the killer's perspective. Most disturbing was a wall of photographs, surveillance images of women, some clearly taken from a distance with telephoto lenses, others more intimate, suggesting the subjects were unaware they were being watched. Among them were photos of Sarah Mitchell, at her apartment, in her classroom, shopping at local stores. The stalking had been extensive, calculated. Reeves stared at the image of Sarah laughing with colleagues on the high school steps, unaware of the predator capturing the moment. His stomach nodded with a mixture of vindication and regret. They had their killer, but too late to save her. While the evidence team processed the hidden room, detectives searched Kessler's garage, finding a false wall concealing specialized medical equipment, force stands, pharmaceutical-grade sedatives, and potassium chloride vials, the same substance found in Sarah Mitchell's system. He created a mobile murder kit, Reeves noted grimly. Portable enough to transport, professional enough to leave minimal evidence. Computer forensics specialists discovered encrypted hard drives containing detailed files on each victim. Kessler had maintained surveillance logs, noting routines, vulnerabilities, and opportunities. His planning spanned months for each murder, studying his victims before making his move. Most revealing was an email account Kessler had used to contact Sarah Mitchell in the weeks before her disappearance, the strange messages she had mentioned to friends. He had methodically re-established contact, referencing their brief college relationship, gradually building trust before setting his trap. Meanwhile, at the county detention center, Kessler remained eerily calm. He requested a private cell, citing his professional status and safety concerns. He spoke only with his attorney, refusing initial interview attempts by investigators. His demeanor, composed, almost clinical, reinforced the profile emerging from the evidence, a calculating predator who saw murder as an intellectual exercise. Reeves understood that breaking through Kessler's reserve would require a different approach. Rather than immediate interrogation, he built a strategy around the evidence they were accumulating. "Let him sit," he told Sheriff Tate. "Let him wonder what we found, how much we know. Meanwhile, we build a case so solid he'll have no choice but to confess." The investigation expanded beyond Millbrook. FBI agents re-examined the similar murders in neighboring counties, finding Kessler's DNA on evidence preserved from those scenes. His digital footprint placed him near each victim around their time of death. Credit card records showed purchases of supplies linked to the crimes. 2 weeks after the arrest, Reeves finally sat across from Robert Kessler in the detention center's interview room. The suspect appeared untroubled, his hospital scrubs replaced by a prison jumpsuit that somehow still looked pressed and neat. His posture was relaxed, hands folded on the metal table, eyes studying Reeves with clinical detachment. "Detective Reeves," Kessler acknowledged with a slight nod. "I was wondering when you'd come personally." "Mr. Kessler," Reeves replied, keeping his voice neutral despite the revulsion churning inside him. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me today." "Intellectual curiosity," Kessler said with a small shrug. "I'm interested in how you finally made the connection." "Some new technique, I presume?" Reeves placed a folder on the table but didn't open it. "We have your DNA on Sarah Mitchell's body. We have your trophies, your journals, your photographs. We know about the other women." "Alleged trophies," Kessler corrected mildly. "Alleged journals. My attorney will challenge all of it." "Your DNA doesn't lie," Reeves countered. "And genetic genealogy gave us the family tree to find you. Science caught up with you, Robert." For the first time, something flickered behind Kessler's composed expression, surprise, perhaps even admiration. "Genetic genealogy? Fascinating. Using relatives' DNA submissions to find me, quite innovative." Reeves saw an opening in Kessler's intellectual vanity. "The technology is remarkable. But I'm more interested in understanding your methodology. The precision, the planning. You left almost nothing behind." The flattery worked. Kessler leaned forward slightly, his clinical detachment warming to professional pride. "Almost nothing is still something, evidently." Over the next 3 hours, Reeves carefully led Kessler through his crimes, appealing to his ego rather than his conscience. The killer gradually revealed his process, how he selected victims who resembled Sarah Mitchell, women who had rejected or disappointed him professionally or personally. How he used his medical knowledge to ensure their deaths appeared natural if discovered. How he meticulously planned each stage, from surveillance to disposal. Sarah was special, though, Reeves prompted, watching Kessler's eyes. "Yes," Kessler agreed, his voice softer. "She was the original. The one who showed me what I was capable of." "Because she rejected you in college?" "She made a choice," Kessler corrected, a flash of anger breaking through his composure. "She chose wrong. They all did." By the end of the interview, recorded and witnessed by the district attorney, Kessler had provided a confession that, while couched in clinical language and self-justification, admitted to 7 murders across 3 states. His intellectual pride had overwhelmed his legal self-interest. Outside the interview room, the district attorney shook Reeves' hand firmly. "Outstanding work, detective. With this confession and the physical evidence, we'll pursue multiple life sentences without parole." Reeves nodded, feeling not triumph but a hollow ache. "I just wish we'd caught him sooner." News of Kessler's confession spread quickly through Millbrook. the community that had gradually healed from Sarah Mitchell's murder was forced to confront the horror anew, and the realization that the killer had lived among them, treated their ailments, attended their community events. The Millbrook Herald ran a front-page feature mapping Kessler's connections to the town, his 16 years at the county hospital, his volunteer work with the local Red Cross, his donations to the high school's science department. The juxtaposition of his public service and private monstrosity was difficult for many to reconcile. How could we not have known, became the question repeated in diners, church gatherings, and school board meetings. How could someone so evil hide in plain sight? For Sarah Mitchell's parents, the arrest brought complicated emotions. Elaine Mitchell told reporters, "Nothing brings our daughter back. But knowing her killer will face justice gives us a measure of peace we've lacked for 7 years." Her husband James added, "We're grateful to Detective Reeves for never giving up." Sarah would have appreciated his determination, she never left a story unfinished either. As the case, men and women of the jury filed out to begin deliberations. The Millbrook community held its collective breath. Sarah Mitchell's parents sat in the front row each day, dignified in their grief, hopeful for resolution. To everyone's surprise, the jury returned after just 4 hours, unusually quick for such a complex case. As they filed back into the courtroom, their faces were solemn, avoiding eye contact with both the defendant and the victim's family. The courtroom stood as the judge entered. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman, a retired schoolteacher, stood. "We have, Your Honor. On the count of murder in the first degree, how do you find the defendant?" "We find the defendant guilty." A collective exhale swept through the courtroom. Sarah's mother gripped her husband's hand, tears streaming down her face. Reeves, seated behind the prosecution table, closed his eyes briefly, 7 years of determination culminating in this moment. Kessler showed no reaction, his expression as impassive as it had been throughout the trial. Only a slight tightening of his jaw betrayed any emotion. The sentencing hearing followed a week later. Victim impact statements were presented, with Sarah's parents, colleagues, and former students describing the void her death had created in their lives. Elaine Mitchell spoke directly to Kessler, her voice steady despite her tears. "You took our daughter believing you were ending her story. But Sarah lives on in her students, in the lives she touched, in the community that remembers her. Your name will fade, but hers will not." When offered the chance to speak, Kessler declined, staring straight ahead as the judge delivered his sentence: life imprisonment without possibility of parole, to be followed by consecutive sentences for the other murders once those trials concluded. As Kessler was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, Reeves watched him disappear through the side door, a monster who had hidden in plain sight for years, finally facing justice. The detective felt no triumph, only a quiet certainty that he had fulfilled his promise to Sarah Mitchell. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Sheriff Tate handled most of the press conference, praising the collaborative effort between agencies and the breakthrough technology that had solved the case. When Reeves was asked to speak, he stepped forward reluctantly. "Today's verdict doesn't bring Sarah Mitchell back to her family and community," he said simply. "It doesn't erase 7 years of questions and pain. But it does affirm that justice doesn't have an expiration date. As long as there's evidence, as long as there are people willing to pursue the truth, no case is truly cold." A reporter called out, "Detective, how does it feel to finally close this case after 7 years?" Reeves considered the question, thinking of the countless nights spent reviewing files, the dead ends, the moments of doubt. "It feels like fulfilling a promise," he answered finally. "A promise to Sarah, to her family, and to this community that the truth matters and will eventually come to light." In the following weeks, Millbrook began the process of healing anew. The high school library dedicated to Sarah Mitchell hosted a special event celebrating her life and legacy, with former students sharing how her teaching had shaped their paths. Her parents established a scholarship in her name for students pursuing careers in education. For Reeves, the conclusion of the Mitchell case brought professional recognition, commendations from the state police, features in law enforcement journals highlighting the use of genetic genealogy in cold cases. Several police departments reached out, requesting his consultation on their own unsolved murders. But more meaningful to him was the small gathering at Blackwater River, where Sarah's friends and family released lanterns into the night sky on what would have been her 42nd birthday. Reeves stood at the edge of the group, watching the lights drift upward, carrying messages of love and remembrance. Elaine Mitchell approached him, holding out a small wrapped package. "We wanted you to have this," she said softly. Inside was a silver bookmark engraved with Sarah's favorite quote from Jane Austen, "There is no charm equal to tenderness of heart." On the reverse was a simple message, "Thank you for bringing her home, the Mitchell family." Reeves ran his thumb over the engraving, throat tight with emotion. "I wish I could have found her sooner," he admitted. "You never gave up," Elaine replied, squeezing his arm gently. "That's what matters. In a world where so many things are forgotten, you remembered Sarah." As the last lanterns disappeared into the darkness, Reeves pocketed the bookmark and gazed across the river. The hunting cabin was gone, demolished after the trial, but the landscape remained, the flowing water, the whispering trees, the stars overhead. Nature had witnessed both the darkness of Kessler's actions and the light of justice finally served. The case had transformed not only Reeves' career but his understanding of persistence. Some cases couldn't be solved through conventional means or within expected timeframes. Some required a willingness to wait for science to evolve, for new approaches to emerge, for the patient accumulation of knowledge that eventually revealed the truth. In his office the following Monday, Reeves removed Sarah Mitchell's photo from his desk, placing it carefully in a frame on the wall alongside other solved cases. In its place, he set a file for another cold case, a teenage girl who had disappeared in 1998, her body found months later with evidence suggesting a calculated murder similar to others in the region. Sheriff Tate stopped by, noticing the new file. "Another project?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Reeves nodded. "The Genetic Genealogy Lab thinks they might be able to help with this one too." The evidence was preserved properly. Tate studied him for a moment. "You know, most detectives would be taking it easy after a case like Kessler's. Maybe enjoying the spotlight a little." "There are other families waiting for answers," Reeves replied simply. "Other victims who deserve to be more than cold case numbers." The sheriff nodded, understanding. "Just don't lose yourself in these cases, Marcus. There's more to life than the job." "I know," Reeves assured him. "But this isn't just a job. It's a promise, to the victims, to their families, to the community. As long as there are cases with evidence that can speak, someone needs to listen." As Sheriff Tate left, Reeves opened the new file, studying the face of the young victim from 1998. Another life cut short, another family waiting for truth, another promise to keep. The work continued, patient and persistent as justice itself. In the aftermath of the Kessler trial, Millbrook attempted to return to normalcy. Store owners removed newspaper clippings from windows, the courthouse steps were no longer crowded with reporters, and conversations gradually shifted from the shocking case to everyday concerns. Yet beneath the surface, the community had been fundamentally altered. An invisible thread now connected residents who had lived through the ordeal, a shared trauma, but also a collective resilience. For Detective Marcus Reeves, the conclusion of the Sarah Mitchell case created an unexpected void. The investigation that had consumed nearly a decade of his life was now boxed, labeled, and stored in the completed case's archive. The professional recognition that followed, commendations, interview requests, speaking invitations, felt hollow compared to the quiet satisfaction of finally bringing justice to Sarah and her family. 3 months after Kessler's sentencing, Reeves sat in Sheriff Tate's office for his annual performance review. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, catching dust motes and golden beams that contrasted with the utilitarian gray of the department furniture. "Your closure rate this year is exceptional," Tate noted, flipping through a file. "The Mitchell case has certainly raised our profile. The governor even mentioned our department in his law enforcement address last month." Reeves nodded absently. "That's good for the department." Tate studied him over reading glasses. "But it doesn't seem to be doing much for you. You've been different since the trial, Marcus. More withdrawn. Taking on additional cold cases without being asked." "Just doing my job," Reeves replied, shifting uncomfortably under the sheriff's gaze. "Is it just the job, though?" Tate closed the file and leaned forward. 7 years on one case changes a person. Sometimes when we finally reach a goal we've been fixated on, there's a letdown. A sense of emptiness where purpose used to be. Reeves didn't respond immediately, surprised by the sheriff's perception. He'd been experiencing exactly that, a strange hollowness where the drive to solve Sarah's murder had resided for so long. "I guess I'm still adjusting," he admitted finally. "But the work continues. There are other cases, other victims who deserve the same persistence. That's why I want to propose something different," Tate said, sliding a brochure across the desk. "The state's establishing a cold case unit focused on using new technology, genetic genealogy, advanced DNA analysis, digital forensics. They're looking for experienced detectives to build the team from the ground up." Reeves glanced at the brochure, then back at Tate. "You're suggesting I transfer?" "I'm suggesting you consider where you can make the greatest impact. Your experience with the Mitchell case makes you uniquely qualified. You understand the patience these cases require, the technological possibilities, and the human cost of unresolved crimes." The proposal lingered in Reeves' mind as he drove home that evening. His modest ranch-style house sat at the edge of town, a bachelor's residence with minimal decoration and practical furnishings. He'd never prioritized creating a home, pouring his energy instead into the job. Now, sitting on his worn porch swing watching sunset colors bleed across the horizon, he confronted the question, was there more he could do beyond Millbrook? That night, he called Elaine Mitchell. Over the months since the trial, they'd developed a respectful friendship, occasionally meeting for coffee or speaking by phone about the foundation established in Sarah's name. "They're starting a cold case unit at the state level," he explained after exchanging greetings. "Sheriff Tate thinks I should apply." "And what do you think?" Elaine asked, her voice warm through the phone line. "I'm not sure. Leaving Millbrook feels like walking away from something, but I don't know what exactly." "Sarah's case is closed, Marcus," she said gently. "You fulfilled that promise. Maybe now it's time to help other families find the same closure we did." Her words crystallized something in his thinking. The emptiness he'd been feeling wasn't the absence of purpose, it was the space for a broader mission. What he'd learned through Sarah's case could serve others still waiting for answers. 2 weeks later, Reeves submitted his application to the West Virginia State Cold Case Unit. The interview process was rigorous, culminating in a presentation where he detailed how genetic genealogy had broken open the Mitchell case and outlined his vision for implementing similar technologies across the state's backlog of unsolved homicides. In January 2019, he received the offer, lead detective for the newly formed unit, based in Charleston but with jurisdiction throughout West Virginia. The position came with resources he'd never had in Millbrook, a dedicated team, access to cutting-edge labs, and partnerships with universities researching forensic advancements. His last day at the Millbrook Sheriff's Department was marked by a modest gathering in the break room. Deputies and administrative staff shared cake and handshakes, with Sheriff Tate presenting him a plaque commemorating his 15 years of service. Reeves felt a bittersweet pang looking around at familiar faces, but an undercurrent of anticipation ran beneath the nostalgia. "You're not going that far," Tate reminded him, clapping his shoulder. "Charleston's just an hour away. And we'll be sending cases your way, I'm sure." "Keep the evidence preserved," Reeves replied with a small smile. "That's the first step." Before leaving town, Reeves visited Sarah Mitchell's memorial at the high school library. A bronze plaque bearing her likeness greeted visitors at the entrance, alongside a quote from her teaching philosophy, "Every story matters. Every voice deserves to be heard." The sentiment seemed fitting for his new direction, giving voice to victims whose stories had been interrupted. His final stop was the riverside park that had replaced the demolished hunting cabin. The simple stone marker for Grace, the community's name for the nameless Beckley girl from 2010, stood as a reminder of another cold case resolved through persistence. Though uninvolved in that investigation, Reeves felt a kinship with the detectives who had pursued it. They understood the commitment these cases demanded. The Charleston offices of the Cold Case Unit occupied the third floor of a renovated historic building downtown. Large windows flooded the space with natural light, illuminating walls already lined with case files waiting to be revisited. A conference room with digital displays and a sophisticated evidence lab completed the facility, designed specifically for the team's specialized work. Reeves spent his first month reviewing the state's inventory of cold cases, prioritizing those with preserved biological evidence suitable for advanced DNA testing. The backlog was overwhelming, over 300 unsolved homicides dating back to the 1960s, each representing a family still waiting for answers. His team consisted of 4 detectives selected for their analytical skills and technological aptitude, a digital forensics specialist, and an administrative coordinator who managed communications with families, labs, and other agencies. They developed a methodical process, evaluating each case for potential genetic genealogy application, identifying which needed traditional reinvestigation, and creating a triage system based on evidence quality and solvability factors. The first breakthrough came 6 months into the unit's operation. A 1992 case involving a young woman found strangled in a Tucker County park had yielded DNA evidence that, at the time, matched no known suspects. Using the same techniques that had identified Robert Kessler, the team uploaded the DNA profile to genealogical databases, building a family tree that eventually pointed to a truck driver who had traveled through the area regularly. When confronted with the evidence, the suspect confessed, describing how a chance encounter at a service station had led to murder. He had lived freely for 27 years, believing himself beyond reach of justice, until science caught up with his past. The victim's mother, now in her 70s, traveled to Charleston for the announcement of the arrest. Her face, lined with years of waiting, showed the complex mixture of validation and renewed grief that Reeves had come to recognize in families receiving long-delayed answers. "I never thought I'd live to see this day," she told Reeves, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "Every birthday, every Christmas without her, I wondered if whoever took her away was out there living a normal life." "Not anymore," Reeves assured her. "And not just because of us, your daughter helped solve her own case by leaving evidence that could speak when technology was ready to listen." The success energized the unit, validating their approach and drawing attention from other jurisdictions interested in implementing similar techniques. Reeves found himself in demand as a consultant, sharing the methodologies they were developing while continuing to build their case clearance rate. By mid-2020, the Cold Case Unit had resolved 11 long-dormant investigations, some through DNA identification, others through digital forensics recovering data from obsolete storage media or by re-examining evidence with technologies that didn't exist during the original investigations. Each success story made headlines, but what affected Reeves most deeply were the private moments with families receiving answers after years or decades of uncertainty. Some collapsed in tears of relief, others sat in stunned silence as the details of their loved one's fate were finally revealed. All expressed the same sentiment: knowing, however painful, was better than endless wondering. One case in particular came to define the unit's second year, the 1998 disappearance of 16-year-old Lily Crawford from a small town in Wyoming County. Her remains had been discovered in a shallow grave 6 months after her disappearance, but the investigation had stalled despite community outrage and media attention. Reviewing the case files, Reeves recognized patterns similar to the Sarah Mitchell murder, evidence of careful planning, a victim who likely knew her killer, and biological samples preserved but insufficient for traditional DNA matching. The case had haunted the original investigators, some of whom had retired still carrying the burden of its unresolved questions. "This one," Reeves told his team during their case selection meeting, spreading the file materials across the conference table. "This one deserves everything we've got." They began by reprocessing the original evidence with current technology. Degraded DNA from underneath Lily's fingernails yielded a partial profile that suggested she had fought her attacker. Soil samples from the gravesite contained pollen and mineral traces that narrowed the timeline of her burial, contradicting the original investigation's assumptions. The team traveled to Wyoming County, re-interviewing witnesses whose memories might have shifted with time's passage. Some recalled details overlooked in the initial investigation: a vehicle seen near Lily's home the day she disappeared, a teacher who had left the school under unusual circumstances shortly after her body was found. Digital forensics specialist Maya Chen reconstructed fragments of Lily's online activity from an old computer stored in evidence. Though primitive by current standards, the recovered data showed concerning interactions with someone claiming to be a photography scout who had expressed interest in Lily's ambitions to become a model. The grooming pattern is clear, Chen explained during a briefing. This person built trust over months, gradually isolating her from friends, suggesting secret meetings. Classic predator methodology. The digital trail led to an email account registered to James Mercer, a former art teacher at Lily's high school who had resigned his position 3 weeks after her body was discovered, citing family reasons. Records showed he had moved to Arizona, where he had taught at various schools before opening a photography studio specializing in youth portfolios. Genetic comparison confirmed Mercer's DNA matched the partial profile from Lily's fingernails. When Arizona authorities arrested him at his studio, they discovered evidence suggesting Lily had not been his only victim. Photographs and journals indicated a pattern of targeting young aspiring models spanning decades. The case culminated in a multi-state investigation, with Mercer eventually charged in 3 jurisdictions for crimes against minors. For the Cold Case Unit, it represented their most significant impact yet, not only bringing justice for Lily Crawford but potentially preventing future victimizations. At the press conference announcing the charges, Reeves stood beside Lily's parents, who had maintained a website dedicated to their daughter's memory since 1999. Her mother clutched a framed photo of Lily in her graduation gown, a composite image created for the memorial service she never lived to experience. Technology finally caught up with the evidence, Reeves explained to reporters. But equally important was the preservation work done by the original investigators. They couldn't solve the case with the tools available then, but they protected the evidence that would speak when science was ready to listen. Afterward, Lily's father embraced Reeves with tears streaming down his face. 22 years, he said, voice breaking. For 22 years, we've walked past his name in our daughter's yearbook, never knowing he was the one who took her from us. But you never gave up on her, Reeves replied. You kept her memory alive, kept asking questions. That persistence matters. The Crawford case brought national attention to the Cold Case Unit's work, resulting in increased funding and expanded capabilities. By the end of 2021, they had established a model program that other states began to emulate, combining cutting-edge science with traditional investigative techniques and a victim-centered approach. For Reeves personally, the work provided a sense of purpose that filled the void left after the Mitchell case. Each successful resolution validated his decision to leave Millbrook for the broader mission. Yet he remained grounded by regular communication with the Mitchell family, whose foundation had expanded to support families of cold case victims throughout West Virginia. On the 3rd anniversary of the unit's formation, Reeves organized a memorial wall in their offices, displaying photographs of the victims whose cases they had resolved. Unlike typical law enforcement displays celebrating arrests or convictions, this wall focused on the lives interrupted, showing the victims in happier moments, surrounded by family or engaged in activities they loved. We solve cases for them, he reminded new team members during orientation, not for statistics or recognition. Every person on this wall was someone's daughter, someone's son, someone's loved one. Their stories deserve completion. The impact of their work extended beyond individual cases, gradually transforming how communities viewed unresolved crimes. Where cold cases had once represented failure and forgotten promises, they now symbolized patience and possibility. Investigations paused but not abandoned, awaiting the right technological key to unlock their secrets. In spring 2022, Reeves received a call from Sheriff Tate in Millbrook. "We've got something you should see," Tate said, an unusual urgency in his voice. A construction crew uncovered remains while excavating for a new development on the old industrial park property. Initial analysis suggests they've been there at least 30 years. The discovery drew Reeves back to his former jurisdiction, now with resources and techniques that hadn't existed during his time there. The remains belong to a young man, approximately 18 to 25 years old, with evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull. No identification was found, but the vintage of clothing fragments and a corroded watch suggested a time of death in the late 1980s. "We're running the DNA through genealogical databases," Reeves explained to Tate as they stood at the excavation site. "If we can identify him, we can start reconstructing his story, who he was, who might have wanted to harm him, who's been missing him all these years." The case connected Reeves' past and present, bringing his journey full circle. The unidentified young man represented countless victims whose cases had gone cold not through investigative failure but because the science needed to solve them hadn't yet evolved. 3 weeks later, the DNA analysis yielded results. The remains belonged to Michael Donovan, reported missing in 1989 from a neighboring county. He had last been seen leaving a bar after an argument with friends, presumably heading home, but had never arrived. His parents had passed away still wondering about their son's fate, but a sister remained, having spent decades searching for answers. When Reeves called to inform her of the identification, her first words after a long silence were, "I always told my parents he wouldn't have just abandoned us. They died thinking he might have chosen to disappear." The identification was just the beginning. The cold case unit applied their full methodology, using soil analysis, historical records, and interviews with people who had known Donovan to reconstruct his final days. They discovered he had been involved with a woman whose jealous ex-boyfriend had a history of violent outbursts and had left the area abruptly around the time of the disappearance. Though the suspect had died in 2005, the evidence they assembled would have been sufficient for charges had he lived. Providing this resolution to Donovan's sister gave her something almost as valuable as a conviction, validation that her brother had been a victim, not someone who had chosen to vanish from their lives. At the memorial service finally held for Michael Donovan in summer 2022, Reeves stood at the back of the small gathering, watching as decades of uncertainty were laid to rest alongside the identified remains. The sister who had never stopped searching placed a photograph on the casket, Michael as a young man with his whole life ahead of him, frozen in time while the world continued without him. Afterward, she approached Reeves with red-rimmed eyes but a peaceful expression. "For 33 years, I've imagined 1,000 different scenarios," she said. "I've wondered if he was alive somewhere, unable to contact us, or if he'd chosen to start over somewhere new. I've wondered if he was suffering, or if he'd found happiness. The not knowing was its own kind of torture. And now?" Reeves asked gently. "Now I can stop wondering. I can stop searching faces in crowds or jumping when the phone rings." She glanced at the fresh grave. "It's not a happy ending, but it's an ending. And that allows for a new beginning." Her words resonated with Reeves, capturing the essence of what the cold case unit provided, not happy endings, but necessary ones. Conclusions that allowed those left behind to move forward without the weight of unanswered questions. Back in Charleston, he added Michael Donovan's photo to the memorial wall, not the image from the missing persons report that had circulated for decades, but the candid snapshot his sister had shared showing him laughing at a family gathering, fully alive in the moment captured. Standing before the growing collection of resolved cases, Reeves reflected on the journey from that October day in 2010 when Sarah Mitchell's body was discovered to the complex network of technologies and methodologies they now employed to speak for the silent. Each face on the wall represented not just a solved case but a ripple effect of healing spreading through families and communities. The work was far from complete. Hundreds of cases still awaited resolution, their evidence preserved in storage facilities across the state. Some would yield to current technologies, others might require innovations not yet developed. But the principle remained constant: as long as evidence existed, as long as someone remembered, a case was never truly cold, just waiting for science to catch up with justice. As Reeves prepared for a new week of investigations, his phone chimed with a message from Elaine Mitchell, a photo of a scholarship ceremony at Millbrook High School, where a young woman had received the award established in Sarah's name. Continuing her legacy, the message read, "Thank you for making this possible." The simple acknowledgement reinforced his conviction in the path he'd chosen. Behind every cold case file was not just a victim but a universe of connections, family members, friends, communities, whose lives had been permanently altered by an unresolved absence. Each resolution rippled outward, transforming grief frozen in time into something that could finally begin to heal. Tomorrow would bring another case, another family waiting for answers, another opportunity to fulfill the promise etched into his consciousness since that morning in the warehouse. That time might separate crime from consequence, but with sufficient patience and evolving science, justice would eventually bridge the gap. In that patient persistence lay the true power of his work, the belief that no voice deserved to remain unheard, no story deserved to remain unfinished, and no truth deserved to remain buried by time. The year 2023 marked a significant evolution for the West Virginia Cold Case Unit. What had begun as an experimental initiative with a small team had grown into a model program with national recognition. Reeves now managed an expanded staff of 12, including specialized forensic technicians, dedicated genealogists, and investigators with diverse backgrounds. Their offices had relocated to a larger facility with state-of-the-art laboratories and digital analysis stations. Yet despite the growth and technological advancement, Reeves maintained the human-centered approach that had defined their mission from the beginning. Every Monday morning still began with a team meeting where they reviewed not just case details but the lives interrupted by violence, ensuring each victim remained a person, not merely a file number. On a crisp autumn morning, Reeves stood before his team in the conference room, a stack of folders in his hand. "Today we're opening investigations into 5 cases from the 1970s, he explained, distributing the materials. These were selected because the evidence was properly preserved despite the age, and recent advances in DNA extraction from degraded samples. Give us a realistic chance at results." Maya Chen, now the unit's lead digital forensics specialist, raised an eyebrow as she scanned the file before her. This victim was only 14, she noted, a hint of emotion breaking through her typically analytical demeanor. Cassandra Wilson, Reeves confirmed. Disappeared walking home from a friend's house in Beckley, 1976. Her remains were found 3 months later in a drainage ditch. Original investigators collected clothing fibers, hair samples, and potential blood evidence, but technology at the time couldn't extract usable profiles. And her parents, asked Dr. Eliza Jefferson, the unit's forensic genealogist. Father deceased in 1992. Mother still living in a nursing home in Beckley. She's 91 now and has been waiting for answers for nearly 50 years. The room fell silent as the team absorbed the weight of that waiting, a lifetime spent wondering who had taken a daughter, and why. For Reeves, these moments reinforced the significance of their work. Some critics questioned the resources devoted to decades-old crimes when current cases demanded attention. But he understood that for families, time didn't diminish the need for truth. "Let's get to work," he said simply, and the team dispersed to their stations, each carrying a piece of Cassandra Wilson's unfinished story. Later that afternoon, Reeves received a visitor who represented another dimension of their impact. 23-year-old Hannah Mitchell, Sarah's niece, had begun an internship with the unit as part of her graduate studies in forensic psychology. Though she'd been only 10 when her aunt was murdered, the case had profoundly shaped her path. "I've finished transcribing those witness statements from the 1983 Martinsburg case," she reported, placing a folder on his desk. "There's an interesting pattern in the descriptions of a vehicle seen near the crime scene, details that weren't connected in the original investigation." Reeves nodded appreciatively. Hannah had inherited her aunt's meticulous attention to detail and narrative patterns. "Good catch. Flag that for the investigative team." Hannah hesitated, then added, "I spoke with my grandmother last night. She wanted me to tell you they're dedicating a new section of the foundation to supporting families waiting for cold case resolutions. They're calling it the Patience Project." The name struck Reeves as particularly fitting. Patience had become the unofficial mantra of their unit, patience for science to evolve, patience for witnesses to come forward, patience for patterns to emerge across seemingly unrelated cases. "Your grandmother understands what these families need," he observed. "Sometimes just knowing they haven't been forgotten makes the waiting bearable." Hannah nodded, a familiar determination in her eyes. "That's why I'm here. I want to be part of making that wait worthwhile." As she left his office, Reeves reflected on how the ripples of each case extended in unexpected directions. Sarah Mitchell's tragedy had not only led to his career evolution but had now influenced her niece's path toward helping others find closure. From darkness, something meaningful had grown. The Wilson case progressed slowly but methodically over subsequent weeks. Using techniques unavailable to the original investigators, lab technicians extracted partial DNA profiles from evidence that had sat in storage for nearly 5 decades. The results were uploaded to genealogical databases, beginning the painstaking process of building family trees that might eventually identify a suspect. Meanwhile, investigators retraced the original investigation, digitizing yellowed reports and interviewing still-living witnesses whose memories, though faded, sometimes yielded details that gained new significance in light of modern understanding of predatory behavior patterns. One such detail emerged during a conversation with Cassandra's childhood friend, now a grandmother herself, who recalled a man who frequently offered rides to local children, claiming to be a talent scout for a modeling agency in Charleston. At the time, his behavior had seemed merely friendly, perhaps eccentric. Through contemporary understanding, it raised immediate red flags. "Did anyone report this to police during the original investigation?" asked Detective Lydia Brennan, the team member conducting the interview. "I mentioned it," the woman replied, "but they seemed more interested in Cassandra's boyfriend or family conflicts. This man wasn't from Beckley, just passed through occasionally. I don't think they considered him a serious suspect." This overlooked thread led the team to newspaper archives, searching for similar approaches reported in other communities during that era. They discovered a pattern spanning several states: young girls approached by a man claiming to be a talent scout, often near schools or youth activities. Some reported uncomfortable interactions, others disappeared. "We could be looking at a serial predator who operated across state lines," Reeves observed during a strategy meeting. "If so, he likely has victims we don't yet connect to him." The investigation expanded, coordinating with agencies in neighboring states to identify similar cold cases. A timeline emerged showing a progression of incidents moving southward along the Appalachian Corridor from 1972 to 1979, then abruptly stopping. Something interrupted his pattern, Brennan theorized. Incarceration for another crime, death, or relocation beyond our current search parameters. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A retired prison guard from North Carolina responded to their interstate bulletin, recognizing the behavioral pattern from an inmate who had served 20 years for the attempted abduction of a teenage girl in 1979. Gerald Marsh had been released in 1999 and died in 2008, but his prison intake had included a DNA sample that might confirm whether he was connected to the Wilson case. When the comparison results arrived, Reeves gathered the team. "We have a match to 3 hairs found on Cassandra Wilson's clothing. Gerald Marsh is our killer." Though the suspect was beyond the reach of earthly justice, the identification still mattered profoundly. For Cassandra's elderly mother, the news brought the resolution she had awaited for 47 years. Reeves visited her personally at the nursing home, showing the respect of delivering such significant news face-to-face. Martha Wilson sat in her wheelchair by a window overlooking gardens now dressed in autumn colors. Her fragile hand trembled as she touched the photograph of the man who had taken her daughter. "All these years," she whispered, "I imagined a monster. But he looks so ordinary." "The most dangerous predators often do," Reeves replied gently. "They hide in plain sight, behind normal appearances and plausible stories." Tears welled in her faded blue eyes. "I'd given up hope of knowing before I died. My herald went to his grave still wondering." She squeezed Reeves' hand with surprising strength. "Thank you for not forgetting my little girl." The conversation affirmed what Reeves had come to understand deeply through his years with the Cold Case Unit: justice wasn't only about punishment. For many families, simply knowing the truth, having questions answered, uncertainty resolved, constituted a profound form of justice in itself. The Wilson case connected to 6 other cold cases across. Mitchell was celebrating its renovation, including a new wing housing the Mitchell Foundation's resources for families navigating unresolved cases. The foundation had grown from a modest scholarship program to a nationwide support network, extending Sarah's legacy far beyond what anyone could have imagined in the aftermath of her murder. Returning to Millbrook stirred complex emotions for Reeves. The town had changed subtly in the years since he'd left: new businesses along Main Street, a renovated courthouse, young families pushing strollers past storefronts once familiar to him. Yet it retained the essential character he remembered, the close-knit community resilient enough to heal from the wounds inflicted by Robert Kessler's crimes. At the library dedication ceremony, Reeves was surprised to be called forward as an honored guest. Elaine Mitchell, now in her 70s but still carrying herself with dignity, embraced him warmly before addressing the gathered community. When Sarah was killed, this town experienced a fracture in its sense of safety and trust, she began, her voice steady despite the difficult subject. The revelation that her killer had lived among us, respected and unsuspected, created a wound that needed more than time to heal, it needed truth. She gestured toward Reeves. Detective Marcus Reeves gave us that truth through years of determined investigation when others might have let the case fade into statistics. But more importantly, he showed us that patience and persistence are forms of hope, that answers can come even after we've stopped expecting them. The newly renovated wing included resources for families, guides to navigating the complex landscape of multi-jurisdictional investigations, information about evolving forensic technologies, and perhaps most valuably, a support network connecting those living through similar experiences. Sarah taught literature because she believed in the power of stories, Elaine continued. She believed every story deserves a proper ending, even the difficult ones. This center exists to help families find those endings, to transform open wounds into scars that can finally begin to heal. After the ceremony, Reeves walked through the library, noting how seamlessly Sarah's legacy had been woven into a living resource. Photos showed her teaching, laughing with students, living fully in moments captured before her life was cut short. But unlike many memorials that froze tragedy in time, this space had transformed grief into purpose. Hannah Mitchell joined him, now completing her doctorate in forensic psychology with plans to work full-time with families of cold case victims. "What do you think?" she asked, gesturing to the center that represented her family's response to unimaginable loss. "I think Sarah would be proud," Reeves replied honestly. "This turns darkness into something that helps others find their way." Hannah nodded, her expression reflective. "You know, when I was younger, I thought justice meant punishment, that finding her killer was the end of the story. Now I understand it was just the beginning of a different story." Her insight resonated with Reeves' own evolution. What had begun as a traditional pursuit of justice, identifying and prosecuting a killer, had expanded into something broader, creating systems that prevented others from experiencing the same prolonged uncertainty, developing technologies that gave voice to evidence previously silent, and building support structures for those navigating the liminal space of unresolved loss. As he prepared to return to Charleston the following day, Reeves visited the riverside park that had replaced the hunting cabin where Sarah's body was found. The transformation was complete, no trace remained of the crime scene, with mature trees and flowering plants now occupying the space where darkness had once resided. A simple stone bench bore a plaque with words that had become something of a mission statement for the cold case unit: "Truth has no expiration date." The phrase captured what Reeves had come to understand deeply through his work, that while time might separate crime from consequence, the right combination of evidence preservation, technological advancement, and human determination could bridge even the widest gaps. Each cold case resolved affirmed this principle, offering hope to those still waiting for answers. Standing by the river, watching sunlight dance across the moving water, Reeves felt the familiar tension between accomplishment and the awareness of how much remained undone. For every case closed, dozens awaited attention. For every family granted answers, many continued to wait. The work was, by its nature, incomplete, a continuous effort rather than a finite task. Yet in that incompleteness lay purpose. Each case represented an opportunity to fulfill a promise delayed but not forgotten, to demonstrate that patience could be rewarded, and to affirm that no voice deserved to remain permanently silenced by violence or time. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park, Reeves turned toward his car, already mentally reviewing the cases awaiting him in Charleston. Tomorrow would bring another family seeking answers, another evidence sample ready for advanced testing, another opportunity to bridge the gap between crime and consequence. The waiting continued, but now it was waiting with purpose, patience not as resignation, but as a form of hope actively pursued. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.